I'm Juniper Skye and I'm 21 years old. Until 3 hours ago, I believed that family meant showing up for each other, especially on the days that mattered most. Then my parents forgot my 21st birthday, leaving me alone in Murphy's diner with a slice of chocolate cake and a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. The worst part? They're the ones who planned the celebration. My mother's voice still echoes in my mind from this morning. 6 o'clock sharp at Murphy's. Sweetheart, don't be late. We have something special planned. What they didn't know was that I had been secretly hoping this birthday would finally be the moment they truly saw me. Not just the daughter-shaped space I'd been filling for 21 years, but what if the reason they forgot wasn't just about busy schedules or missed calendar alerts? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The birthday cake sat across from you like an accusation. Its single candle having burned down to a waxy puddle hours ago. Murphy's diner buzzed with the familiar evening rhythm of Grayson. Hollow college students cramming for midterms over coffee that had seen better days. Elderly couples sharing pie in comfortable silence, the occasional professor grading papers. With red ink bleeding across hope, I'd grown up in this town, nestled between the Appalachian foothills and the sprawling campus of Grayson University. Every corner held a memory. The bookstore where I'd spent countless afternoons reading stories about girls who belonged somewhere. The coffee shop where I'd written my first short story, the tree-lined streets where I'd walked home from school. Wondering why I always felt like I was visiting my own life, my phone had been silent for 3 hours and 17 minutes. Not a single text, call, or notification from either Vivian or Graham Skye, my parents, though that word was starting to feel strange in my mouth. Like speaking a foreign language I'd been pretending to understand. Cam, Rosario slid into the booth. Across from me, her dark curls escaping from the messy bun she'd thrown together after her shift at the campus bookstore. She took one look at the abandoned cake and my probably red eyes and said, "Okay, so we're burning their house down, right? Because I know a guy who knows a guy." They forgot. The words felt hollow, inadequate. How do you explain that the people who raised you simply erased the most important day of your life from their memory? They planned this whole thing this morning. Mom even called to remind me to dress nice because they had something special planned. Cam reached across the table and stole a bite of my cake without asking, a gesture so normal it made my chest ache. "Junie, honey, your parents forget a lot of things. Remember when your dad missed your high school graduation because he was absorbed in grading papers about Victorian literature? Or when your mom scheduled a business dinner on the same night as your acceptance to the creative writing program? She wasn't wrong." My childhood was punctuated by these small disappearances, birthdays celebrated a week late, school events attended by empty chairs, achievements acknowledged with distracted, "That's nice, dear" responses. But this felt different. This felt like the final thread in a tapestry that had been unraveling for years. "This is different," I said, voicing the thought that had been circling my mind since I'd sat down. "They specifically planned this. Mom made the reservation. Dad said he was leaving work early. They coordinated for once in their lives and then they just ... vanished." The diner's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of yellow that made everyone look slightly sick. Outside, the October evening was settling into that crisp promise of winter that always made me nostalgic. For things I couldn't name. Students hurried past the windows with scarves wrapped tight and backpacks slung low, heading toward the warm glow of dorm rooms and study groups and all the ordinary magic of belonging somewhere. I pulled out my phone again and scrolled through our family text thread. The last message was from this morning. Mom writing, "So excited for tonight. See you at 6. With an uncharacteristic number of exclamation points. Before that, 3 days of silence. Before that, Dad sending a random article about the symbolism of birthdays in ancient cultures, the kind of thing he shared when he was thinking about me, but didn't know how to actually talk to me. "Have you tried calling them?" Cam asked, though we both knew I had. 6 times in the past 2 hours, each call rolling directly to voicemail. Their phones weren't off, they were being ignored. I showed her a photo I'd taken of myself an hour ago, sitting alone at the decorated table. Mom had called ahead to have them put up streamers and balloons, order the cake, even request the corner booth by the window where the evening light was prettiest. Every detail had been planned except for the part where they actually showed up. "Look at this," I said, pulling up the photo I'd found in my phone earlier while waiting. It was from last year's birthday dinner, the three of us at Chez Laurent, the fancy French place downtown. But as I stared at it now, something nagged at me. Dad looked distracted, checking his watch. Mom was smiling, but it was her professional smile, the one she used in client meetings. And I looked like I was trying too hard to be happy, like I was performing gratitude for an audience that wasn't really watching. "Junie," Cam said gently, "when was the last time you felt like they actually saw you? Not saw the idea of you or the daughter they think they have, but actually saw you." The question hit like cold water. I wanted to protest, to defend them, to list all the ways they provided for me and supported me and loved me in their distant, efficient way. But the truth was sitting heavy in my chest, like a stone I'd been carrying for years without realizing its weight. "I don't know," I whispered. "Maybe never." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. If I'd never been truly seen by the two people who were supposed to know me best, what did that say about me? Was I somehow unworthy of attention? Too ordinary. To be memorable? Had I been trying so hard to be the perfect, undemanding daughter that I'd made myself invisible? Cam reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped box. "I know it's not much, but I wanted to give you this before the family." "Celebration?" She smiled sadly. "Guess it's the only celebration now." Inside was a vintage compass, brass and beautiful, with an inscription on the back. "For finding your way when you're not sure where you belong." "See, I saw it at that antique shop on Maple Street," she said. "The owner told me it belonged to a woman who traveled the world alone in the 1940s, after her family said she was too fragile for adventure. She proved them wrong." I held the compass in my palm, feeling its weight. The needle spun for a moment before settling north, steady and sure. Something about it felt like a promise, though I couldn't say of what. "Thank you," I said, and meant it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Grayson Hollow live its evening life outside the window. Students met friends for dinner. Families gathered around tables, talking and laughing, and taking up space in each other's lives. Couples held hands while walking past, making plans for tomorrow and next week and next year. What if they didn't forget? I said suddenly. The thought had been building like storm clouds, dark and ominous. What if they just decided not to come? Cam frowned. Why would they do that? I don't know. But think about it, they made the reservation, planned everything, reminded me to be here. That's not forgetting. That's either something going terribly wrong or ... I paused, afraid to voice the alternative. Or what? Or they're trying to tell me something they don't know how to say directly. The idea felt both paranoid and inevitable. My parents had always been conflict avoidant, preferring to let problems solve themselves through time and neglect rather than confrontation. Maybe this was their way of showing me I didn't matter as much as I'd hoped. Maybe this was their way of saying that at 21, I should stop expecting them to celebrate me like a child. Or maybe it was something else entirely. I pulled out an old family photo I kept in my wallet, one of the few where all three of us looked genuinely happy. I was maybe 7, missing my front teeth, standing between Mom and Dad at some long-forgotten beach vacation. But as I looked at it now, I noticed something I'd never seen before. At the very edge of the frame there was part of another person. Just a hand on the edge of a floral dress, like someone had been cropped out of the picture. "Cam, look at this." I showed her the photo. "Do you see that? The edge of someone else?" She squinted at the tiny detail. "Yeah, that's weird. Who crops someone out of a family photo?" "Someone who wants to forget they were there," I said. Though I didn't know why that thought came to me so clearly. The compass in my other hand seemed to grow warmer, its needle still pointing steadily north. North toward the university campus. North toward my dorm room. North toward a future that suddenly felt uncertain and full of questions I didn't know how to ask. "I need to go home," I said, but as the words left my mouth, I realized I wasn't sure where that was anymore. The drive back to my parents' house felt like traveling through a memory that kept shifting when I wasn't looking directly at it. Every familiar landmark, the gas station where Dad used to buy me chocolate milk, the park where Mom taught me to ride a bike with characteristic efficiency, seemed to belong to someone else's childhood. By the time I pulled into the driveway at 9:47 p.m., the house was dark except for the porch light Mom always left on, a gesture that used to feel like love, but now felt like obligation. Their cars were in the garage. They were home. They had simply chosen not to come. I sat in my Honda Civic for 10 minutes, compass still clutched in my palm, trying to decide if I was more hurt or angry. The hurt was winning, spreading through my chest like ice water, but anger was easier to carry. Anger had momentum. Anger had direction. The front door was unlocked, as always. Grayson Hollow was the kind of place where people still trusted their neighbors and forgot to lock their cars. I stepped into the foyer, breathing in the familiar scent of Mom's vanilla candles and Dad's coffee, and called out, "Hello, I'm home." Silence. I found them in the living room, Dad grading papers at his usual spot on the couch, Mom working on her laptop at the dining table, both of them existing in the same space without acknowledging each other, a tableau I'd witnessed 1,000 times before. They looked up when I entered, and something flickered across their faces that I couldn't quite read. Surprise? Guilt? Or maybe just the mild annoyance of being interrupted. "Junie," Mom said, closing her laptop with unnecessary force. "You're home early. How was dinner with Cam?" The casualness of her tone hit me like a physical blow. She had either genuinely forgotten about my birthday dinner, or she was pretending with an acting skill I'd never witnessed before. "Dinner with Cam?" I repeated slowly. "Mom, what was supposed to happen at 6 o'clock tonight?" Dad looked up from his papers, pen still hovering over what appeared to be an essay about symbolism in Wuthering Heights. 6 o'clock? Wasn't that... Oh, the color drained from his face. "Oh no, Junie, your birthday dinner?" The way he said it, like he was remembering something from months ago instead of hours, made my stomach clench. This wasn't the reaction of parents who had been in a car accident or faced some emergency that prevented them from coming. This was the reaction of people who had simply forgotten I existed. "You made a reservation," I said, my voice steadier. Then I felt you called to remind me to dress nice. You said you had something special planned. Mom's face went through a complicated series of expressions: confusion, realization, horror, and then something that looked almost like relief. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." I got caught up in the Henderson merger, and the whole afternoon just got away from me. I completely forgot. "You forgot my 21st birthday." "It was an accident," she said quickly. "You know how work gets, especially with the quarter-end reports due. I had every intention of being there." But Dad was shaking his head, looking down at his hands. "Vivian, we talked about this at lunch. We both said we were leaving work early for Junie's dinner. This wasn't just your thing, we planned it together." "Well, obviously something came up," Mom snapped, and there was an edge to her voice I'd heard before, usually during their rare arguments. "It's not like we don't have other opportunities to celebrate. She'd have plenty more birthdays." The words hung in the air like a bad smell. I stared at her, this woman who had raised me for 21 years, and realized I was looking at a stranger. The mother I'd imagined, the one who loved me imperfectly but deeply, had maybe never existed at all. "I need some air," I said, and walked out before either of them could respond. I found myself in Dad's study, a cluttered sanctuary lined with books and papers and the detritus of an academic life. This had always been my favorite room in the house, the place where I'd done homework as a child while he graded papers, where we'd had our few real conversations about books and writing and the way stories could make sense of a senseless world. Wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. Hidden beneath a stack of student essays in Dad's desk drawer was a manila folder marked "Important Documents" in Mom's precise handwriting. Inside, beneath their marriage certificate and insurance papers and Dad's tenure documents, was a single sheet of paper that changed everything. It was an adoption certificate. My adoption certificate. I sat down hard in Dad's chair, the paper trembling. In my hands, according to the document, I had been adopted through the Riverside County Family Services on March 15th, when I was 3 months old. The birth mother was listed as V. Morrison, age 19. The birth father was marked unknown. The adoptive parents were listed as Vivian and Graham Skye V. Morrison, Vivian Morrison. My mother's maiden name. My brain struggled to process what this meant. If Vivian was my birth mother, why was there an adoption certificate? Why had I been processed through family services as if I were being placed with strangers? I read the document 3 more times, looking for some explanation, some detail that would make this make sense. But the facts were stark and clear. I had been legally adopted by my own biological mother when I was 3 months old. At the bottom of the folder was a hospital bracelet, tiny and pink, with 2 different last names written on it. The first had been crossed out so heavily I couldn't read it, but the second clearly said Morrison. Clipped to it was a birth certificate, not the one I'd always known about, but an original that listed my birth weight as 6 pounds 3 oz, and my time of birth as 3:47 a.m. What caught my attention was a handwritten note in the margin, "Baby B, twin. Sister still in NICU." Twin sister. I had a twin sister. The room spun around me as I tried to piece together the implications. If I had a twin sister, where was she? Why was I the one who got adopted by our biological mother while she, stayed in the system? Got placed with another family? My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. I took photos of everything with my phone, then carefully returned the documents to exactly where I'd found them. Whatever was happening here, whatever secrets my parents had been keeping, I needed to understand it before I confronted them. I walked back to the living room on unsteady legs. Mom and Dad were having a whispered conversation that stopped abruptly when I appeared. They looked at me with expressions I couldn't read: guilt, fear, something that might have been sadness. "Junie," Dad said carefully, "about tonight. We really are sorry. Sometimes work just—" "I'm adopted," I said. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's face went white. Mom's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "How did you—" Mom started, then stopped herself. "So it's true." "Yes," Dad said quietly. "It's true." "But you're my biological mother," I said to Mom. "So why is there an adoption certificate? Why did you give me away and then adopt me back?" Mom's professional composure cracked, and for the first time in my life, I saw her look genuinely frightened. "It's complicated, Junie. There were circumstances... What circumstances? And where is my twin sister?" The effect of those words was immediate and devastating. Mom made a sound like she'd been punched. Dad dropped his head into his hands. The air in the room became thick and heavy. charged with 21 years of unspoken truth. How long have you known? Mom whispered. About 5 minutes, I said. I found the papers in Dad's desk, along with a hospital bracelet that mentions a twin sister. So I'll ask again, where is she? Dad looked up at Mom, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible. We don't know. What do you mean you don't know? We kept you, Mom said, and her voice was thick with something that might have been tears. We gave her up for adoption through the state. A closed adoption. We were 19, Junie. We were kids ourselves. We couldn't handle 2 babies, but we couldn't bear to give you both away. So we ... So you chose, I finished. You picked me and gave her away. It wasn't like that, Dad said quickly. You were smaller, you had some health issues early on. The doctors said you might need extra care. We thought it would be easier to manage with 1 baby, and we wanted to keep the one who might need us most. The logic was brutal in its practicality. I could see how 2 scared 19-year-olds might convince themselves they were making the responsible choice. But I could also see how that choice had poisoned everything that came after. So all these years, I said slowly, when I felt like I was missing something, like there was this empty space I couldn't explain, it was because half of me was literally missing. Neither of them answered, but their silence was answer enough. What's her name? I asked. We don't know, Mom said. The adoption was closed. We never heard anything after the placement. But you've thought about her, I pressed. You've wondered where she is, what she looks like, if she's okay. Mom's face crumpled then, and I saw 21 years of buried guilt spill over. Every day, she whispered. Every single day. I stood up, the compass heavy in my pocket, and looked at these people who had raised me with the growing realization that I didn't know them at all. They weren't the distant but loving parents I'd always believed them to be. They were strangers who had been carrying a secret so heavy it had shaped every interaction we'd ever had. Is that why you forgot my birthday? I asked, because every year on this day, you remember that somewhere out there is another daughter you threw away. We didn't throw her away, Dad said firmly. We made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, but you've regretted it ever since, I said. And you've been taking that guilt out on me my whole life. That's why you can never really see me, why you always seem to be looking at something just over my shoulder. You were looking for the daughter you lost. The truth of it settled around us like dust after an explosion. They didn't deny it because they couldn't. This was the secret that had been eating away at our family for 21 years. The ghost that had haunted every birthday and holiday, an ordinary Tuesday. I need to find her, I said, double quotes J, you and I. No, Mom said quickly. The adoption was closed for a reason. She has her own family now, her own life. It wouldn't be fair to disrupt that. Fair? I laughed, and it sounded harsh even to my own ears. You want to talk about fair? Was it fair to let me grow up feeling like something was wrong with me because I could never quite earn your attention? Was it fair to make me compete with a ghost for 21 years? I walked toward the door, then turned back. I'm going to find my sister, with or without your help. Junie, please. Dad called after me. Don't do this out of anger. This won't fix anything. Maybe not, I said, but it might fix me. The next morning arrived gray and bitter, October wind rattling my dorm room windows like an impatient visitor. I barely slept, my mind churning. Through 21 years of memories with new context, every family photo took on different meaning now. Every awkward pause in conversation suddenly made sense. Every time I felt like I was performing my own life instead of living it, Cam found me in the campus library at 7 a.m., surrounded by open laptops and printed articles about adoption searches, looking like I'd been hit by a truck carrying existential. Crisis. Okay, she said, sliding into the chair across from me with 2 cups of coffee. I brought caffeine and moral support. What did you find? I'd spent the night researching adoption laws in our state, closed adoption procedures, and DNA testing services. The compass sat open on the table beside my laptop, its needle pointing steadily north toward a future I couldn't yet see, but somehow knew I needed to walk toward. Her name might be Ivy, I said without preamble. I found some records online, and there was a baby girl placed for adoption through Riverside County on the same day I was born. The file summary mentions botanical first name requested by birth mother. Vivian always loved plant names. Cam leaned forward, scanning the papers I printed. This is from the county records database. Public information, mostly. Birth announcements. Adoption notices, that kind of thing. Look at this. I showed her a hospital record I'd found buried in an obscure genealogy website. Twin girls born to V. Morrison on my birthday. One placed with adoptive family, one retained by birth mother who later married and readopted child under new surname. So you were right. They kept you and gave her away. The words still stung, but they were also oddly liberating. For the first time in my life, my feelings made logical sense. The emptiness I carried, the sense of incompleteness, the way I'd always felt like I was looking for something I couldn't name. It was because I literally was incomplete. I started a DNA profile on one of those ancestry sites, I said, pulling up the website on my laptop. If she's done the same thing or if she's looking for family, we might be able to connect. Cam studied the screen. That could take months, though. And that's assuming she even wants to be found. I know. But it's a start. I closed the laptop and pulled out a manila folder. I also found something else last night after you dropped me off. I went back to my parents' house this morning while they were at work. Junie, you didn't. I needed answers, Cam, and I found them. I opened the folder and spread out photocopies of documents I'd found hidden in various places around the house. Look at these. The first was a letter, handwritten in Mom's careful script, dated just 3 weeks after my birth. It was addressed to my second daughter and said, in part, I want you to know that giving you away was the hardest thing I've ever done. Your sister and I think about you every day. I hope someday you'll understand that we kept the one who needed us most because we were too young and scared to know how to keep you both. If you ever want to find us, we'll be here. The letter had never been sent. Jesus, Cam whispered. She wrote to her but never sent it? That's not all. I showed her the next document, a series of bank statements showing regular deposits to a savings account opened in the name Ivy Skye Morrison. $50 a month for 21 years, accumulating to over $12,000. They've been saving money for her, Cam said, understanding immediately. For 21 years. Even though they have no way to contact her, no way to know if she's okay, they've been setting aside money, like they're still her parents, too. The discovery had left me with complicated feelings. On one hand, it proved that my parents had never forgotten my sister, that their guilt and love had been quietly accumulating for 2 decades. On the other hand, it meant they'd been living a double life, maintaining a connection to a daughter they'd given away while struggling to connect with the one they kept. There's more, I said, pulling out the final document. It was a hospital bracelet, but not the one I'd found the night before. This one was white instead of pink, with Baby A. Morrison written in faded ink. Attached to it was a Polaroid photo of two tiny babies in adjacent hospital bassinets, each wearing matching bracelets. "Oh my God," Cam breathed. "That's you and her?" I nodded, studying the photo that was the only image I'd ever seen of us together. We were impossibly small, maybe a day old, both with wrinkled red faces and wisps of dark hair. But even then, there were differences. I was on the left, slightly smaller, with what looked like medical equipment nearby. She was on the right, alert and robust, one tiny fist raised like she was already fighting for something. "She looks fierce," Cam observed. "She looks like she belongs somewhere," I said, "even as a baby." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of discovery settling around us. Then Cam asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What are you going to do now?" "I'm going to find her." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Okay, but how? You can't just show up at random houses asking if anyone adopted a baby 21 years ago. She was right, of course. But I've been thinking about this all night, and I had an idea. Professor Lang? Your writing professor? She's published books about adoption stories. She might know people, resources, ways to search that aren't obvious. And she's always telling us that the best stories come from the places where we're afraid to look. It was a long shot, but it felt right. Professor Odessa Lang had a reputation for being unconventional, for pushing her students to explore the stories that scared them most. If anyone would understand why I needed to do this, it would be her. "What about your parents?" Cam asked. "Are you going to tell them what you're doing?" I thought about the way they looked last night, guilty, frightened, sad. Not yet. I need to understand more before I can face them again. Right now, I'm too angry to have a productive conversation. "Angry is okay," Cam said. "Angry is understandable. But don't let it eat you alive, okay? Your parents made a terrible choice when they were barely adults, but they've spent 21 years trying to love you through their guilt. That has to count for something." She was right, but I wasn't ready to forgive yet. The hurt was too fresh, the sense of betrayal too sharp. Maybe eventually I could see their choice with compassion, but right now I needed to focus on moving forward rather than processing the past. "I have Professor Lang's office hours at 2, I said, gathering up the documents. "Will you come with me?" "Of course." "But JUNI ... what if you find her and she doesn't want a relationship? What if she's angry about being given away? What if she blames you for being the one they kept?" The questions had been haunting me too, but I'd reached a kind of peace with the uncertainty. "Then at least I'll know," I said. "At least I'll know who I am and where I came from and why I've always felt like half of me was missing. Even if she hates me, even if she wants nothing to do with me, I'll finally be complete." Cam nodded slowly. "Okay, then let's go find your sister." Professor Lang's office was exactly what you'd expect from someone who taught courses with names like narrative truth and emotional memory and writing the unwritable. Books stacked floor to ceiling, mismatched furniture that looked like it had been collected from estate sales. Plants that somehow thrived despite the lack of natural light. And the persistent smell of chai tea and old paper. She looked up when we knocked, her silver hair escaping from what might have been a bun that morning but had devolved into organized chaos. "Junie and Cam, right? Come in, come in. What brings you to my lair during office hours? Please tell me it's not about the assignment due Friday, because I have strong feelings about students who wait until the last minute to ask for extensions." "It's not about the assignment," I said, settling into one of her mismatched chairs. It's about family secrets and adoption searches and the kind of story that's too strange to be fiction. Her eyes lit up with the particular intensity she reserved for complicated human dramas. Now that sounds like the beginning of something worth writing. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about the forgotten birthday, the adoption papers, the twin sister I'd never known existed. I showed her the documents I'd found, the photo of us as babies, the unsent letter Mom had written 21 years ago. Professor Lang listened. Without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, nodding at certain details like they confirmed suspicions she'd had about me all semester. So, she said when I finished, you want to find Ivy. I need to find her, I corrected. I've spent my whole life feeling like something was wrong with me, like I was fundamentally incomplete. Now I know why. And you've considered that she might not want to be found, that her adoptive family might have given her a completely different narrative about her origins. I've considered it, I said, but I still have to try. Professor Lang leaned back in her chair, studying me with the same intensity she brought to workshop critiques. You know, I wrote a book about this once. Not adoption specifically, but about the stories families tell themselves to make sense of impossible choices. The thing about family secrets is that they're never really secret. They live in the spaces between words, in the things that don't get said, in the way people look at you when they think you're not paying attention. She pulled a business card from her desk drawer. This is a friend of mine, Sarah Chen. She's a private investigator who specializes in adoption searches. She's expensive, but she's also ethical and thorough. If your sister can be found, Sarah will find her. I took the card, feeling like I was accepting a key to a door I wasn't sure I was ready to open. Thank you. But, Professor Lang continued, before you make that call, I want you to write something for me. What kind of something? A letter to your sister. Not the letter you'll send if you find her, but the letter you'd write if you knew she'd never read it. Write everything you want her to know, everything you're afraid to say, everything you hope for and fear about meeting her. Write until you understand what you're really looking for. It was typical Professor Lang advice: solve the emotional problem. Through writing, find clarity through the act of putting words on paper. But it also made sense. Before I could face my sister, I needed to face my own expectations and fears. How long do I have? I asked. Take the weekend. Write the letter. Then decide if you're ready to make the call. Sometimes the writing process shows us we're not looking for what we thought we were looking for. We left her office with homework that felt more important than any assignment I'd ever been given. As we walked across campus toward the dorms, Cam asked, "Are you nervous about writing the letter?" Terrified, I admitted. What if I write it and realize I don't actually want to find her? What if the fantasy of having a sister is better than the reality? Then you'll know that too, Cam said. And that's still better than spending the rest of your life wondering. That night, I sat at my desk with a blank piece of paper and the compass open beside me, its needle pointing steadily north toward truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. But I picked up my pen anyway and began to write, Dear Ivy ... The letter took me 3 days and 17 drafts to write. Each version revealed something different about my fears, my hopes, my anger at our parents, my longing for connection. By the time I finished, I had 4 single-space pages that felt like bleeding onto paper, but also like the most honest thing I'd ever written, Dear Ivy. I don't know if I'll ever send this letter or if you'll ever want to read it if I do. I don't even know your real name, though I'm hoping it's Ivy because that's what I've been calling you in my head since I found out you existed 3 days ago. 3 days ago, I thought I was Juniper Skye, only child, 21 years old, unremarkable. in every way except for this persistent feeling that something was missing from my life. Now I know that something was you. I found out about you in the worst possible way, through papers hidden in our father's desk after our parents forgot my 21st birthday. Not forgot like they had emergency, but forgot like I simply don't matter enough to remember. It turns out they've been carrying the guilt of giving you away for 21 years, and it's poisoned their ability to love me properly. I grew up feeling like I was always auditioning for their attention, never quite earning it, never understanding why I couldn't make them see me. Now I know it was because they were always seeing you too, the daughter they couldn't keep. I'm angry about a lot of things right now, but mostly I'm angry that we lost 21 years of knowing each other. I'm angry that you grew up not knowing you had a sister who would have shared everything with you, books and secrets and late-night conversations about boys and dreams and all the ordinary magic of sisterhood. I'm angry that I grew up with this empty space inside me that I couldn't explain, this sense that I was only half of something that should have been whole. But I'm also grateful in a complicated way because finding out about you has finally made me make sense to myself. All those times I felt lonely in a crowded room. All those moments when I looked in the mirror and felt like I was seeing an incomplete picture, it was because I was incomplete. Half of me has been living a different life somewhere else, and I need to find that half to understand who I really am. I don't know what kind of life you've had, what kind of family raised you, whether you've been happy or sad or wonderfully ordinary. I don't know if you've ever felt the same emptiness I've carried, or if your adoptive family loved you so completely that you never missed having a sister. I hope they did. I hope you grew up feeling seen and valued and celebrated every single day. I also don't know if you'll want to meet me, or if you'll be angry that I'm disrupting your life, or if you'll blame me for being the one our parents kept. I understand if you do. I can't imagine how it would feel to discover that your biological family gave you away but kept your twin sister. I can't promise I wouldn't be angry if our situations were reversed, but if you're willing, if you're curious, if you've ever wondered about the family you came from or the sister you never knew you had, I'd like to try to find you. Not to disrupt your life or replace the family that raised you, but to complete something that's been broken for 21 years. I want to know if you like the same books I do, if you have the same weird habit of eating cereal for dinner when you're stressed, if you inherited dad's tendency to lose track of time when reading or mom's ability to remember every detail of conversations from years ago. I want to know if you're studying something completely different from creative writing, if you live in a big city or a small town, if you're brave in all the ways I'm scared to be. Most of all, I want to apologize for getting to grow up with parents we shared, even if they were distant and difficult parents. I want to apologize for having 21 years of ordinary family moments while you were building a life with strangers. And I want to tell you that if I'd known about you, if I'd had any choice in the matter, I would have chosen to find you. Years ago, I'm including a photo of myself and one of us together as babies, the only picture I've found of us both. I'm also including my phone number and email, and I'm going to leave this letter with a private investigator who specializes in adoption searches. If you want to contact me, you can. If you don't, I'll understand that too. Whatever happens, I want you to know that somewhere in North Carolina, you have a sister who's been missing you her whole life without knowing it, and who'll be grateful for whatever connection you're willing to share. Love and hope. Juniper reading the final version left me emotionally drained but strangely clear about what I needed to do. I called Sarah Chun the next morning. Her office was in downtown Grayson Hollow, tucked between a vintage bookstore and a coffee roastery. Exactly the kind of place where you'd expect to find someone who made a living reuniting separated families. Sarah herself was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who dealt with complicated emotional situations professionally. "Tell me about your sister," she said after I'd explained the basic situation. I spread out all the documents I collected, the adoption papers, the hospital bracelets, the photo of us as babies, the savings account statements, Mom's unsent letter. Her name might be Ivy. She was placed through Riverside County Family Services on the day we were born. The adoption was closed, but she would have been placed with a family looking for a newborn girl. Sarah studied the papers carefully, making notes on a legal pad. "This is more information than most people have to start with," she said. "The hospital bracelet, especially if they kept consistent records, I should be able to track the adoption. Through the placement agency, how long does something like this usually take?" "Depends on a lot of factors. If she's done any kind of genealogy research, if she's registered with adoption reunion sites, if her adoptive family stayed in the area, it could be days or months. But I have to warn you, not every search ends. In reunion, sometimes people don't want to be found. Sometimes they've built lives that don't have room for biological family. Are you prepared for that possibility?" I thought about the letter I'd written, about the emptiness I'd carried for 21 years, about my parents' guilt and my own need for completion. "I'm prepared to try," I said. "Whatever happens after that, at least I'll know I tried." "Okay." "My fee is $1,500 for the initial search, plus expenses. If I find her and she's willing to make contact, there's an additional fee for mediation services. And I require that all initial contact go through me, no showing up on doorsteps unannounced." It was more money than I had in my checking account, but I had savings from my campus job and birthday money I'd been accumulating for years. How do we start? "I'll begin with the hospital records and the placement agency. I'll also run your DNA profile against the major databases and register you with several adoption reunion sites. In the meantime, I want you to think carefully about what you're hoping for from this relationship. The fantasy of a sister is often very different from the reality of one." 2 weeks later, Sarah called me with news. "I found her," she said without preamble. "Her name is Ivy Morrison Chen. She's 21, lives in Asheville, about 2 hours north of you. She's a graphic design student at UNC Asheville, and according to her social media, she's been looking for her biological family for the past year." My heart stopped, then started again too fast. "She's been looking for us?" She registered with 3 different adoption reunion sites and submitted her DNA to 2 genealogy services. Junie, she wants to be found." The relief was overwhelming. For 2 weeks, I'd been preparing myself for rejection, for the possibility that my sister had built a perfect life that didn't need disruption from a biological family she'd never known. But she'd been looking for us too. What do I do now? I've sent her a message through the reunion site where she's registered, letting her know that her biological twin sister is looking for her. I included your letter and the photo of you both. As babies, if she wants to make contact, she respond to me, and we can arrange a phone call or meeting. That was on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I had an email from Sarah. She wants to meet you. This Saturday, 2 p.m. at the Blue Moon Cafe in Asheville. She'd be wearing a red scarf. Are you ready for this? I wasn't ready. I would never be ready. But I was going anyway. The drive to Asheville took exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes, most of which I spent alternating between excitement and terror. Cam had offered to come with me, but this felt like something I needed to do alone. The compass sat in my passenger seat, needle pointing steadily north toward a future I couldn't imagine but was finally brave enough to face, The Blue Moon Cafe was one of those carefully curated places that felt like someone's idealized version of a coffee shop. Exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, local art for sale, and the kind of atmospheric lighting that made everyone look like they were starring in an indie film about meaningful encounters. I was 15 minutes early, so I ordered a chai latte I was too nervous to drink and found a table near the window where I could watch for someone in a red scarf. At exactly 2 p.m., she walked in, and I knew immediately it was her, even before I saw the scarf. She looked like me, but also nothing like me. Same dark hair, same build, same basic facial structure, but where I was soft and uncertain, she was sharp and confident. Where I moved through the world apologetically, she claimed space like she belonged wherever she was. She was wearing vintage jeans and boots that looked like they could walk through anything. And yes, a red scarf that somehow managed to look both stylish and practical. She scanned the cafe until her eyes met mine, and something electric passed. Between us, recognition that went deeper than sight, older than memory. "Juniper?" she said, approaching my table. "Ivy?" I said, standing up too quickly and knocking over the chair. We stood there for a moment. Two strangers who shared DNA and a birthday and 21 years of wondering, and then she laughed, a sound that was almost but not quite like my own laugh, and said, "Well, this is surreal." "Completely surreal," I agreed, and somehow that broke the initial tension enough for us to sit down. "So," she said, pulling out her phone and showing me a photo. "I brought this. It was the same photo I had, the two of us as babies and adjacent. Hospital bassinets." But her copy was in better condition, and I could see details I'd missed in my faded version. She was indeed the baby on the right, alert and fierce-looking even then. "I've had this my whole life," she said. "My adoptive mom gave it to me when I turned 18 and told me I had a twin sister somewhere. She said she'd been waiting until I was old enough to handle the information responsibly. Your mom sounds like a good person." "The best," Ivy said firmly. "Janet and David Chun adopted me when I was 3 months old. They couldn't have biological children, but they'd wanted a family for years. Mom always said I was the best thing that ever happened to them, and they made sure I grew up knowing I was chosen, not abandoned." The difference in our experiences was immediately clear. Where I'd grown up feeling like an obligation, she'd grown up feeling celebrated. Where my parents had been distant and guilt-ridden, hers had been present and grateful. "Tell me about them," I said. "Your parents?" "Mom teaches kindergarten, Dad's a carpenter. We live in this rambling house that Dad built himself, with a garden that Mom tends like it's her second child. They're not rich, but they're happy, and they made sure I always knew I was loved." She paused. "What about yours?" "Our biological parents?" This was the hard part. "They're complicated," I said carefully. "Dad's a literature professor, Mom's a corporate strategist. They're successful and intelligent and distant. I spent most of my childhood feeling like I was trying to earn their attention and never quite succeeding, because they were guilty about giving me away. It wasn't a question. She'd figured it out from my letter, from the way I described my family dynamics. Yeah, they've been carrying that guilt for 21 years, and it's affected everything. They save money for you. They have over $12,000 in an account with your name on it. Mom wrote you a letter when we were babies, but never sent it. They remember you every day, but they've never figured out how to be present for the daughter they kept." Ivy absorbed this information quietly. "That's got to be hard for you." It is. "But it makes more sense now that I know about you. I always felt like something was missing, like I was only half of what I should be." "I felt that too," she said. Even with the best parents in the world, even knowing I was loved completely, there was always this sense that somewhere out there was another half of me. Mom and Dad encouraged me to look for you when I was ready. We talked for 3 hours, comparing notes on our lives, finding similarities and differences that fascinated us both. We both preferred tea to coffee, both had a tendency to read multiple books at once, both were left-handed and chronically late and prone to getting lost in our own thoughts. But where I was studying creative writing, she was studying graphic design. Where I was cautious and overthinking, she was bold and intuitive. Where I apologized for taking up space, she claimed it confidently. "Can I ask you something?" I said as we were preparing to leave. "Anything? Are you angry?" About being given away while I was kept. She considered the question seriously. I was when I first found out. Angry at them for choosing you. Angry at you for being chosen. Angry at the whole situation for being unfair. But then I thought about the life I've had with the Chuns, and I realized that if our biological parents had kept us both, I might not have ended up where I belong. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing. It was a mature perspective, more mature than I felt capable of at 21. But it also gave me hope that we could build something real, that the anger and resentment I'd been afraid of might not be insurmountable barriers. "Would you want to meet them?" I asked. "Our biological parents?" "Eventually, maybe, but I want to get to know you first. I want to understand what it means to have a sister before I tackle the complicated feelings about the parents who gave me away." We exchanged phone numbers and made plans to meet again the following weekend. As I drove home, I felt something I'd never experienced before, the sensation of being complete, of carrying all the pieces of myself for the first time in 21 years. But I also knew that the hard part was just beginning. Finding Ivy was only the first step. Now I had to figure out how to integrate this new relationship into a life that had been built around her absence, and how to navigate the complicated emotions of parents who had spent 2 decades avoiding the consequences of their choice. The weeks that followed my meeting with Ivy felt like living in 2 different timelines simultaneously. In one timeline, I was the same Juniper Skye I'd always been, attending classes, writing papers, having movie nights with Cam, maintaining the careful emotional distance from my parents that had characterized our relationship for years. In the other timeline, I was someone completely new, a sister, a twin, half of the pair that was finally beginning to understand itself. Ivy and I talked or texted every day. She sent me photos of her life in Asheville, her art studio cluttered with design projects, the coffee shop where she worked part-time, the hiking trails she explored on weekends. I sent her photos of Grayson Hollow, the campus library where I spent most of my time, the diner where I'd celebrated my lonely birthday, the mountain views from my dorm room window. We were constructing a shared vocabulary, building a relationship. That felt both brand new and ancient. But the secret was eating away at me. My parents had called twice since our confrontation, leaving voicemails that I hadn't returned. They wanted to talk through what had happened, to help me process the revelation about my adoption. What they didn't know was that I'd moved far beyond processing. I found Ivy, I was building a relationship with her, and every day I didn't. Tell them felt like a small betrayal of everyone involved. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in November. I was in my dorm room, video chatting with Ivy while she worked on a design project, when she mentioned something that stopped me cold. "Oh, I forgot to tell you," she said, not looking up from her tablet. "I got a weird piece of mail today." Birthday card addressed to Ivy Morrison, but with no return address. It's been happening every year since I turned 18. My blood turned to ice. A birthday card? Yeah, always the same kind, those fancy ones from the expensive stationery store. Never signed, just happy birthday written inside. My mom thinks it's from my birth family, but we could never figure out how they got my address since the adoption was closed. I knew exactly how they'd gotten her address. The private investigator my parents had obviously hired years ago, the careful tracking of their lost daughter, the birthday cards that represented 21 years of guilt and love and the inability to just leave well enough alone. Ivy, I said carefully, I think those cards are from our parents. She looked up from her work. What makes you say that? Because they've been saving money for you for 21 years. Because they never forgot. You. Because they're the kind of people who would hire a private investigator to find you, but be too scared to actually make contact. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. This explained so much why they'd seemed more distant around. My birthday every year, why they'd forgotten this year's celebration entirely. They'd been too focused on their secret ritual of remembering the daughter. They'd given a way to properly celebrate the one they kept. There's something else, I said, the realization hitting me like cold water. If they've been tracking you for years, if they know where you live and what name you use, they probably know that we found each other. Ivy set down her tablet and gave me her full attention. You think they know we've been talking? I think they hired the same kind of private investigator I did. I think they've been keeping tabs on you your whole life, and I think they're terrified that you're going to show up and disrupt the carefully constructed guilt they've been living with. It was a horrible realization, but it explained so much. The distance, the forgotten birthday, the way they looked at me that night when I confronted them about the adoption, not just guilty about the past, but fearful about the future. What do you want to do? Ivy asked. I want to confront them. I want to drag this whole mess into the light and make them deal with it honestly for once in their lives. Are you sure? Once you do that, there's no going back. Everything changes. She was right, of course. But I was tired of living in the space between truth and lies. Tired of carrying other people's secrets. Tired of protecting parents who had spent 21 years protecting themselves from the consequences of their choices. I'm sure, I said, but I want you there when I do it. The plan we devised was simple and terrifying. The following Saturday, I would bring Ivy home for lunch. I would tell my parents I was bringing a friend from school, nothing more. Let them see her face. Let recognition dawn slowly. Let them confront the reality of both their daughters in the same room at the same time. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold. November asserting itself with the kind of weather that made you want to stay inside and avoid confronting anything difficult. I picked up Ivy in Asheville and we drove to Grayson Hollow in nervous silence, both of us processing what we were about to do. Are you ready for this? I asked as we pulled into my parents' driveway. No, she said honestly. But I think that's the point. Some things you can't be ready for. You just have to do them and hope you survive. The house looked exactly the same as it had my whole life, tidy, expensive, carefully maintained, and somehow devoid of warmth. We stood on the porch for a moment, and I could see Ivy taking it in, comparing it to the rambling, loved house where she'd grown up. It's very neat, she said diplomatically. That's one word for it. I used my key to let us in, calling out, Mom, Dad? I'm here and I brought my friend Ivy. They appeared from the kitchen almost immediately, both wearing the kind of carefully casual weekend clothes that suggested they'd put thought into looking relaxed. Mom was carrying a dish towel, Dad had reading glasses pushed up on his head, and they both wore the slightly strained smiles they used when forced to be social. The moment they saw Ivy, everything changed. Dad went white as paper and sat down hard in the nearest chair. Mom dropped the dish towel and made a sound like all the air had been punched out of her lungs. And for a long moment, nobody said anything at all. "Hello," Ivy said finally, her voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "I'm Ivy Morrison Chen. I think you know who I am." Mom started crying then, not the careful tears of someone trying to maintain composure, but the ugly, broken sobs of someone whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed. Dad just stared, his eyes moving between Ivy and me like he was trying to solve a puzzle with too many pieces. "How?" He said finally. "I found the adoption papers," I said. "After you forgot my birthday, I went looking for answers. And I found more than I bargained for. We've been talking for a month," Ivy added. "Getting to know each other, building the relationship we should have had our whole lives." Mom looked up from her tears, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Ivy, your name really is Ivy." "It is. My adoptive mom said she chose it because the letter with my placement papers requested a botanical name." "I wrote that," Mom whispered. "I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that would grow and flourish wherever you ended up." The pain in her voice was raw and immediate, 21 years of buried grief spilling over. But I found that I wasn't ready to comfort her, yet wasn't ready to absolve her of the choices that had shaped all our lives. "You've been sending her birthday cards," I said, "for years. You hired someone to find her, to track her, to keep tabs on her life. But you never once thought to actually contact her directly." Dad found his voice. "We were afraid. We were afraid she'd be angry, or that her adoptive family wouldn't want us interfering, or that we'd disrupt the life she built. So instead, you just watch from a distance? Like she was some character in a story you were reading instead of your daughter?" "She's not our daughter," Mom said sharply, then immediately looked stricken. "I mean, she is biologically, but she has parents. Real parents who raised her and loved her and who encouraged her to find her biological family when she was ready." Ivy interrupted. "My parents aren't threatened by you. They're secure enough in their relationship with me to want me, to have answers about where I came from." The contrast was stark and painful. Ivy's adoptive parents had been confident enough in their love to encourage her search for her origins. My biological parents had been so insecure in their choices that they'd spent 2 decades hiding from the consequences. "We thought about you every day," Dad said to Ivy. "We wondered if you were happy, if you were healthy, if you ever thought about us. The money we saved, the cards we sent, it was our way of trying to maintain some connection without disrupting your life. But you disrupted my life anyway," I said. "Your guilt about giving her away poisoned your relationship with me." I grew up feeling like I was competing with a ghost, like I could never quite earn your attention because half of it was always focused on the daughter you lost. "That's not fair," Mom said. "We love you. We've always loved you. But you've never been able to love me completely because you were always carrying grief about her. And meanwhile, she grew up feeling incomplete because she knew she had a biological family out there somewhere that she couldn't find." The room fell silent except for the sound of Mom's quiet crying and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. We were all processing 21 years of choices and consequences, all trying to figure out how to move forward from a place where everyone had been hurt by decisions made by scared 19-year-olds who thought they were doing the best they could. Finally, Ivy spoke. "I want to see the room." "What room?" Mom asked. "The room you would have put me in if you'd kept me. Every adoptee wonders about the life they didn't have. I want to see where I would have grown up." It was a request that cut to the heart of everything. Mom led us upstairs to what had always been Dad's office, but as we entered, I realized what I was seeing with new eyes. The built-in bookshelves that would have been perfect for children's. Books. The window seat that would have been ideal for reading or dreaming. The space for a second bed, a second desk, a second child. This would have been your room, Dad said quietly. We always knew it would be, even after we ... Even after you were placed. We could never bring ourselves to really make it into anything else. Ivy walked around the room, touching surfaces, looking out the window at the backyard where she might have played. It's a good room, she said. I think I would have been happy here. But there was something in her voice that suggested she was. Also recognizing that her actual childhood had been different, perhaps better in ways that our parents' distant love couldn't have provided. Your room, she said to me. Can I see your room? My childhood bedroom was down the hall, and as we entered it, I saw it through her eyes, the carefully curated space of an only child, the books and awards and photos that told the story of someone trying very hard to be worthy of attention. It was a room that suggested loneliness, effort, the performance of being enough. You tried so hard, Ivy said, looking at my academic awards lined up on the dresser. You were trying to be perfect enough to fill the space I left behind. I didn't. No, I was trying to fill a space, I said. I just knew that nothing I did ever felt like enough. She turned to look at our parents, who had followed us upstairs and were standing in the doorway looking like they wanted to disappear. You damaged both of us, she said, her voice calm but firm. You damaged me by giving me away, and you damaged her by making her try to be two people at once. But the thing is, I'm not actually damaged. I had wonderful parents who helped me build a strong sense of self. The question is whether Junie can recover from trying to be enough for parents who are too guilty to see her clearly. It was a devastating assessment, made more powerful by its lack of anger. Ivy wasn't attacking. Then she was simply stating facts about the impact of their choices. What do you want from us? Mom asked, her voice small. I want you to stop sending me birthday cards like I'm some charity case you're supporting from a distance, Ivy said. I want you to either real relationship with me or leave me alone entirely. And I want you to figure out how to love the daughter you kept without making her pay for the guilt you feel about the daughter you gave away. And I want to stop being afraid of my own family, I added. I want to stop walking on eggshells around your feelings. I want to be able to talk about Ivy without watching you flinch. I want us to figure out how to be a family that includes both of us, even if we live in different places and have different parents. We stood there in my childhood bedroom, 4 people connected by blood and choices and 21 years of consequences, trying to figure out how to build something real from the wreckage of secrets and guilt. Can we try? Dad asked finally. Can we try to do better? That depends, Ivy said. Are you ready to stop being victims of your own choices and start taking responsibility for the impact those choices had on other people? It was a fair question and a hard one. But as I looked at my parents, really looked at them, maybe for the first time I saw something that gave me hope. I saw 2 people who were finally ready to stop hiding from the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The weeks following our confrontation passed in a strange suspension of normal life. My parents and I entered a period of careful politeness, like diplomats from nations that had recently declared peace but weren't sure yet whether they trusted each other. Meanwhile, Ivy and I grew closer every day, texting constantly, visiting each other on weekends, building the kind of intimate sibling relationship that usually develops over decades but felt urgent and necessary given how much time we'd already lost. The private investigator I'd hired, Sarah Chun, called me in early December with news that changed everything. I've been doing some additional research, she said, looking into your parents' history around the time of your birth. I found something interesting. I was in my dorm room, supposedly working on a final paper for Professor Lang's class, but actually procrastinating by reorganizing my desk for the third time that day. What kind of something? Hospital records, social services files, some legal documents that were sealed but became public after 25 years. Junie, there's more to the story than your parents told you. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Can you meet me at my office? This is the kind of conversation that's better had in person. An hour later, I sat across from Sarah's desk while she spread out documents that looked official and ominous. Ivy had driven down from Asheville when I called her, and she sat beside me. Both of us braced for whatever revelation was coming. Your parents didn't just choose to keep you and give Ivy away, Sarah said without preamble. According to these records, you were born with significant health complications. Premature, underweight, with respiratory issues that required weeks in the NICU. The hospital social worker recommended that if the birth parents were considering placing both children, they should prioritize keeping the baby who would need more medical care and support. I stared at the hospital records, trying to process what this meant. So they didn't just randomly pick me, not random at all. Ivy was healthy and robust, likely to thrive with any loving family. You needed specialized care, ongoing medical monitoring, parents who can navigate the healthcare system and advocate for a medically complex child. The social worker essentially told them that if the kid could only handle one baby, you were the one who needed them most. Ivy reached over and took my hand. That changes things, she said quietly. Does it? I asked, because I wasn't sure how to feel about this information. On one hand, it made my parents' choice seem less arbitrary, more thoughtful. On the other hand, it meant I'd been kept because I was the defective twin, the one who couldn't survive without them. There's more, Sarah said, pulling out another set of documents. Your adoptive family situation, Ivy, it wasn't random either. Janet and David Chun specifically requested a healthy newborn because they'd been trying to have children for 8 years and had experienced multiple miscarriages. The social worker matched you with them because you were exactly what they were hoping for, a strong, healthy baby who would thrive in their loving home. So I got the parents who could handle a sick child, I said, and Ivy got the parents who were desperate for a healthy baby to love. In the most basic terms, yes, but that's not the whole story either. Sarah pulled out one more document, this one handwritten. This is a letter your mother wrote to the social worker 3 days after your birth, when both of you were still in the hospital. She handed me the letter, and I read it aloud so Ivy could hear. I know you think we're too young to make this decision, and maybe you're right. But I want you to understand that this isn't about not wanting both babies. This is about loving them enough to make sure they both get what they need. The baby who stays with us will have anxious parents who are barely adults themselves, who are terrified of making mistakes, who have no money and no family support. The baby who goes to the Chun family will have parents who have been preparing for years, who have financial stability and emotional maturity and so much love they don't know what to do with it. We're not choosing which child to love. We're choosing which child needs the specific kind of love we're capable of giving right now. The letter continued, but I had to stop reading because my vision was blurring with tears. This wasn't the story I've been telling myself for a month, that my parents had callously chosen one twin over the other. This was the story of two scared kids trying to make an impossible decision with only love and terror to guide them. They knew, Ivy said, her voice thick with emotion. They knew you would get anxious, overprotective parents, and they knew I would get confident, secure parents. They were trying to match us with what we needed. That doesn't excuse 21 years of guilt and distance, I said, but my anger was deflating, being replaced by something more complicated. No, it doesn't, Sarah agreed. But it does explain it. They weren't living with guilt about a random choice. They were living with the weight of a decision they'd made based on love, but which had permanent consequences they weren't prepared for. I thought about my childhood, the constant doctor visits, the way my parents had hovered anxiously over every cough and fever, the way they'd seemed terrified that something terrible would happen to me if they looked away for too long. I'd interpreted it as overprotection, as smothering. But maybe it was the lingering trauma of nearly losing me in those first weeks of life, combined with the constant fear that they'd made the wrong choice in keeping me. There's one more thing, Sarah said. The birthday cards Ivy's been receiving? They weren't just sent randomly. According to these records, your parents arranged with the adoption agency to send annual updates and small gifts through a third party, with the understanding that when Ivy turned 18, she would be given the option to receive direct contact information if she wanted it. What? Ivy and I said simultaneously. The agency was supposed to contact you on your 18th birthday and ask if you wanted to be connected with your birth family. But there was a change in staff, and the message never got delivered. Your parents have been waiting 3 years for word that you wanted to meet them. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. My parents hadn't been sending secret birthday cards and stalking Ivy from a distance. They'd been participating in a program designed to allow eventual contact, waiting for her to make the first move. So when I started looking for them through the adoption registries, Ivy said slowly, they might have been notified. They were. That's actually how I was able to find you so quickly, Junie. When you hired me, your parents had already been notified that Ivy was searching. They just didn't know how to respond or whether you knew about her existence. I felt like I'd been building a case against my parents for weeks, accumulating evidence of their failures and selfishness, only to discover that the foundation of my argument was false. They weren't villains who had hidden away one daughter while neglecting the other. They were just people who had made a complex decision under terrible circumstances and then spent 21 years living with the consequences. I need to call them, I said. What are you going to say? Ivy asked. I don't know yet, but I'm tired of carrying anger for something they didn't actually do. That evening, I called my parents from my dorm room while Ivy sat on my bed providing moral support. They answered on the first ring as if they'd been waiting. Junie? Mom's voice was tight with worry. Is everything okay? I need to tell you something, I said. I hired a private investigator. I know about the hospital records, the letter you wrote to the social worker, the adoption agency program. I know you weren't just randomly sending. Ivy birthday cards or stalking her from a distance. The silence that followed was long and heavy. You know, Dad said finally, I know that you made an impossible decision based on love and medical necessity, and that you've been living with guilt about it ever since. Even though you probably made the right choice given the circumstances. Mom started crying again, but these tears sounded different relief mixed with grief. We were so young, Junie. We had no idea what we were doing. Every day for 21 years, we've wondered if we made the right choice. You did, Ivy said, leaning closer to the phone. I had exactly the childhood I needed with parents who were ready for me. And Junie had the childhood she needed with parents who could handle her medical complications and who loved her enough to sacrifice everything for her. But we failed you, Dad said to me. We were so afraid of losing you, so traumatized by those first weeks when we almost did lose you, that we never learned how to just love you without fear. And then we were so guilty about Ivy that we couldn't celebrate you properly without thinking about the daughter we'd given away. I understand now, I said, but I need you to understand something too. The guilt you've been carrying has hurt all of us. It made me feel like I had to earn your love, like I was somehow not enough, and it kept you from being the parents you could have been. What do we do now? Mom asked. How do we fix this? We start over, Ivy said. All of us. We stop being victims of a choice you made when you were teenagers, and we start building relationships based on who we are now. I'd like that, Dad said, if you're both willing. We're willing, I said. But it means family dinners with both. Daughters present. It means acknowledging that this family has 4 parents and 2 sisters who live in different places, but love each other. It means no more secrets and no more guilt. And it means, Ivy added, that you get to know the daughter. You gave away who turned out amazing because you made sure she went to people who could love her properly. We made plans for Christmas, our first holiday, as a complete family. Complicated and non-traditional and probably destined to be awkward, but honest in a way we'd never been before. After I hung up, Ivy and I sat in my dorm room processing everything. That had changed in the space of a single conversation. Are you okay? She asked. I think so. It's weird having the thing you've been angry about suddenly make sense. It's like being angry at someone for lying to you and then finding out they were actually telling the truth all along. The anger was still valid, Ivy said. The impact of their choices was still real, even if their motivations were better than you thought. I know, but now I can separate the impact from the intention, which makes it easier to forgive them. And easier to forgive yourself for feeling incomplete all these years. She was right. For the first time since learning about my adoption, I didn't feel like there was something fundamentally wrong with me. I felt like someone who had survived a difficult beginning and grown up in a family that loved me imperfectly, but genuinely. Thank you, I said. For what? For existing. For looking for us. For being everything I didn't know I was missing. Ivy smiled, and in her face I saw myself, but also someone entirely separate, my sister, my twin, my other half who had grown into a whole person on her own. Thank you for finding me, she said, and for being brave enough to blow up our parents' careful lies so we could build something real. Christmas morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of perfect December day that makes North Carolina look like a postcard. I stood in my parents' kitchen at 9 a.m., wearing an apron that said, World's Okayest Daughter, a gift from Can that had seemed funny until it became accidentally profound, trying to coordinate the most emotionally complex family gathering in the history of the Skye household. Ivy and her adoptive parents, Janet and David Chun, were arriving at noon. My biological parents had spent the past week in a state of barely controlled anxiety, cleaning the house with military precision and rehearsing conversations that they were certain would be awkward. I'd assumed the role of diplomatic coordinator, which was exhausting but also strangely satisfying. Junie, should we use the good china? Mom called from the dining room where she was setting and resetting the table for the 4th time. It's just lunch, Mom. Regular plates are fine. But it's the first time we're meeting Ivy's parents. First impressions matter. I found her standing over the dining table, holding a dinner plate like contained the secret to successful family integration. Her hair was perfect, her outfit was carefully chosen, and she looked like she was preparing for a job interview, rather than a family meal. Mom, I said gently, they're not judging you. They're grateful to you. You gave them the daughter they've been hoping for 8 years. You're not on trial here, but what if they hate us? What if they think we're terrible people for giving her away? Dad appeared in the doorway, looking equally anxious in his best sweater. What if Ivy realizes she doesn't actually want a relationship with us? What if this whole thing has been a mistake? I looked at my parents, these people who had raised me with such careful distance, who had spent 21 years protecting themselves from the emotions. They were finally being forced to confront and realize they were terrified. Not just nervous, but genuinely frightened that they were about to lose Ivy all over again. "Listen to me," I said, sitting down at the table and gesturing for them to join me. "Ivy chose this. She's been looking for you for a year. She drove 2 hours every weekend for a month to get to know me. She spent 3 weeks coordinating schedules so that her parents could meet you. She's not here because she feels obligated. She's here because she wants to be." "But what if?" Mom started. "No," I interrupted. "No more what ifs. You spent 21 years living in fear of hypothetical consequences. Today, you're going to live in the reality of 2 daughters who love you enough to make this work." At exactly noon, a blue Honda Pilot pulled into our driveway. Through the window, I could see Ivy in the passenger seat, gesturing animatedly while talking to her parents. She was wearing a red sweater that made her look festive and confident. And when she caught sight of me watching from the window, she waved with an enthusiasm that made my chest tight with affection. "They're here," I announced unnecessarily, since Mom and Dad were also pressed against windows like anxious children waiting for Sana. I opened the front door before they could knock, and suddenly our foyer was full of people carrying gifts and making the kinds of nervous small talk that happens when strangers are trying very hard to like each other. Janet Chun was exactly what I'd expected from Ivy's descriptions. Warm and practical, with laugh lines around her eyes and the kind of confidence that comes from years of loving children. David was quieter, with kind eyes, and the calloused hands of someone who built things for a living. They both looked at my parents with expressions of curiosity rather than judgment, which I took as a promising sign. "Vivian Graham," Janet said, extending her hand to my mother, "it's so wonderful to finally meet you. Ivy talks about you constantly." "She does?" Mom asked, clearly surprised. "Oh, yes. She's been very excited about building a relationship with her biological family. And of course, we're so grateful for the opportunity to meet you and thank you in person." "Thank us?" Dad asked. "For trusting us with her," David said simply. "For making the decision that brought her into our lives. We know it couldn't have been easy." I watched my parents' faces transform as they realized that Ivy's adoptive parents weren't their competition or their judges. They were people who understood exactly how much love it had taken to make the choice my parents had made. "Would you like to see the house?" Mom asked, suddenly animated. "Ivy asked to see where she would have grown up, but I thought you might be curious too." As we moved through the rooms, Janet and David asked thoughtful questions about my childhood, about my parents' careers, about the town where Ivy might have grown up. They weren't interrogating. They were genuinely interested in understanding the path not taken. "This is the room that would have been Ivy's," Dad said. Opening the door to his office, Janet stood in the doorway, taking in the built-in bookshelves and window seat. "She would have loved this," she said. "She's always been drawn to cozy spaces where she can read and create." "We have photos," David offered, pulling out his phone, "if you'd like to see how she grew up." For the next hour, we sat in the living room while David and Janet shared pictures and stories from Ivy's childhood. There was Ivy at 3, covered in finger paint and grinning. Ivy at 7, missing her front teeth and holding a handmade Father's Day card. Ivy at 16, dressed for prom with a confidence that radiated from the photo. "She was always our little artist," Janet said, showing a picture of teenage Ivy surrounded by art supplies. "Even as a toddler, she saw the world differently than other kids. More color, more possibility." She gets that from Vivian, Dad said quietly. Vivian was always creative, always seeing things from unexpected angles. It was the first time I'd heard him make a connection between my mother and either of us daughters, and something shifted in the room. These weren't two separate families awkwardly trying to coexist. These were people who all loved the same person. From different perspectives, comparing notes about someone they all wanted to understand better. What was Junie like as a child? Janet asked, turning to my parents. Thoughtful, Mom said immediately. Always watching, always taking things in. She was the kind of child who would sit quietly in a corner and absorb everything that was happening around her. She still does that, Ivy said, grinning at me. I'll be talking for an hour, and then she'll say something that shows she caught every single detail I mentioned. She was also incredibly empathetic, Dad added. Sometimes I worried it was too much for her, how deeply she felt other people's emotions. She would come home from school upset because a classmate was sad, or because a character in a book was suffering. That's why she's such a good writer, Ivy said. She understands people from the inside out. As the afternoon progressed, the conversation became easier and more natural. We talked about everything: books and movies, career choices, travel dreams, family traditions. Janet and David shared stories about Ivy's adoption, about the day they brought her home, about the way she'd filled their house with laughter and creativity. My parents talked about my childhood, about the way I'd surprised them with my resilience and thoughtfulness. Can I ask you something? Mom said to Janet during a lull in conversation. Do you ever resent us for giving her to you instead of keeping her ourselves? Janet considered the question seriously. Never, she said finally. David and I couldn't have biological children. We spent 8 years trying, hoping, grieving every month when it didn't happen. When the social worker called to tell us about Ivy, it felt like a miracle. You didn't give her to us, you shared her with us. And because of that choice, 3 families got exactly what they needed. But what about when she wanted to find us? Dad asked. Weren't you afraid she'd love us more or want to leave you for us? David laughed, a warm sound that filled the room. Have you met our daughter? She's not someone who loves in limited quantities. Finding you didn't make her love us less. It just gave her more people to love. That's the thing about Ivy, Janet added. She has this enormous capacity for connection. Meeting you, getting to know Junie, it's just expanded her world. She comes home from our weekends here glowing with happiness because she's discovered this whole new part of herself. I looked around the room at my biological parents who were finally beginning to understand that their choice had created good rather than harm. At Ivy's adoptive parents, who were secure enough in their relationship with her to celebrate her connections to other people. At Ivy herself, who was somehow managing to bridge 2 families with grace and humor. I want to say something, I announced, standing up and looking around the room. 6 months ago, I thought I was an only child with distant parents who would never really see me. Today, I'm sitting in a room with 2 sets of parents and a sister I adore, and I finally understand what family is supposed to feel like. What's it supposed to feel like? Ivy asked. Like there's enough love to go around, I said. Like you don't have to earn your place or compete for attention or worry that caring about one person means caring less about another. Like you can be completely yourself and know that everyone in the room is committed to figuring out how to love that person. Mom started crying again, but these were different tears, happy tears, relief tears. Tears that suggested she was finally letting go of 21 years of guilt and fear. We have something for you, Dad said to Ivy, pulling out a wrapped box. It's not much, but we wanted to give you something that connected you to this family. Inside the box was a locket, silver and delicate, with our family crest engraved on the front. When Ivy opened it, she found photos of both families on one side, my parents and me. On the other, Janet, David, and her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's so you never have to choose," Mom said. "So you can carry both families with you always." "Actually," Ivy said, reaching into her bag, "I have something too." She pulled out a wrapped package and handed it to me. "I made this for you." Inside was a hand-bound journal, the cover designed with intricate patterns that somehow managed to tell the story of two sisters finding each other. On the first page, in Ivy's careful handwriting, was an inscription: "For the sister who taught me that being complete doesn't mean being perfect. For all the stories we'll write together." "And for all of you," Ivy said, pulling out 3 more packages, "I made these." Each package contained a framed piece of art of family tree that included both sets of parents and both daughters, with branches that intertwined and supported each other rather than competing for space. It was beautiful and complex, and somehow captured the truth of what we'd all built together. "This is what we are now," Ivy said, looking around the room. "Not a traditional family, but a real one. Not perfect, but honest. Not simple, but worth it." As the day wound down and it came time for the Chuns to drive back to Asheville, we all lingered in the foyer, reluctant to end this first successful gathering. There would be more birthdays and holidays and ordinary weekends, but this one felt special, like the day we'd all officially become a family. "Thank you," Janet said to my parents, "for raising such an incredible daughter, and for trusting us to do the same with ours." "Thank you," Mom replied, "for loving her the way she deserved to be loved, and for letting her love us too." "And thank you," Ivy said to me, "for being brave enough to blow up everyone's carefully constructed secrets so we could build something real." After they left, my parents and I sat in the living room, processing the day. The house felt different, warmer, more lived in, like it had finally become a place where real emotions were allowed. "That went well," Dad said, sounding surprised. "It went perfectly," I corrected. "And you know why? Because everyone in that room was committed to making it work. Because we all chose love over fear. I'm proud of you," Mom said suddenly, "for finding her, for bringing us all together, for refusing to let us hide behind our guilt anymore." "I'm proud of all of us," I said, "for finally becoming the family we were always supposed to be." Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it the kind of April warmth that made everyone at Grayson University forget they had final exams to study for. I was sitting in Professor Lang's office for our last meeting of the semester, discussing the final portfolio I'd submitted for her advanced narrative class. "This is extraordinary work, Ginny," she said, flipping through the collection of stories I'd written over the past few months. "The piece about finding your sister in particular, it's some of the most honest, emotionally complex writing I've seen from a student." The story she was referring to was one I'd been working on since Christmas, trying to capture the experience of discovering that your whole life has been built around a fundamental misunderstanding. It had been difficult to write, requiring me to revisit emotions I was still processing, but it had also been necessary. "It doesn't feel extraordinary," I said. "It feels like trying to make sense of something that's too big and complicated to fit into words." "That's exactly what makes it extraordinary. You're not trying to simplify or resolve the complexity. You're letting it exist in all its messy, contradictory truth. That's what real writing does." She pulled out a letter from her desk drawer. "Speaking of which, I have something for you." It's a recommendation for a writing fellowship at the Mountain Writers Retreat this summer. Full scholarship, 6 weeks in Vermont working with established authors. I think you should apply. I stared at the letter, feeling a familiar flutter of anxiety. 6 weeks away from Grayson Hollow, away from my family just as we were learning how to be a family. Away from Ivy when our relationship was still so new and precious. I don't know. If I can leave, I said. Things are still complicated with my family. I don't want to miss anything important. Professor Lang smiled. Junie, what do you think your sister would say if she knew you were turning down opportunities because you were afraid of missing family time? I didn't have to think about it. Ivy would be furious. In the months since we found each other, she'd become my biggest champion, constantly pushing me to take risks and claim space and stop apologizing for wanting things. She'd probably drive down here and drag me to Vermont herself, I admitted. Exactly. And what does that tell you about the kind of family you've built? That they want me to succeed even when it means being apart. Real love isn't possessive, Junie. It's liberating. And from what you've told me about your family, they've learned that lesson better than most. I took the letter, promising to think about it, and walked across campus toward my dorm. The cherry trees were blooming, covering the walkways with pink petals that looked like confetti celebrating the end of another academic year. Students were spread out on the quad, studying and socializing and soaking up the sunshine that made even the most stressful parts of college feel manageable. My phone buzzed with a text from Ivy. Emergency family meeting at Mom and Dad's house. At 6, bring snacks and your moral support. For a split second, I felt the old panic emergency meant crisis. Crisis meant someone was hurt or angry or leaving. But then I remembered that in our new family dynamic, emergency usually meant good. News that can't wait for a scheduled visit. I stopped by the campus store for chocolate chip cookies and drove to my parents' house, where I found everyone already gathered in the living room. Ivy was practically vibrating with excitement. Janet and David were grinning like they had a secret, and my parents looked cautiously optimistic. Okay, I said, settling into my usual spot on the couch. What's the emergency? I got accepted, Ivy announced, bouncing slightly in her chair. The graphic design internship in Portland. The one I applied for but never thought I'd actually get. I got it. The room erupted in congratulations and hugs. The internship Ivy was talking about was with a prestigious design firm that specialized in environmental activism campaigns. She'd applied on a whim, thinking it was too competitive and too far away to be realistic. But apparently her portfolio had impressed them enough to offer her a spot in their summer program. That's incredible, I said, hugging her tightly. When do you start? June 1st, which gives me a month to figure out housing and logistics and how to convince my brain that I'm actually capable of doing this. You're absolutely capable, Janet said firmly. We've been telling her all semester that she's ready for something like this. But it's 3,000 miles away, Ivy said, and I could hear the anxiety underneath her excitement. It's a completely different coast, completely different people. What if I'm not as good as I think I am? What if I can't handle being so far from everyone? What if you're exactly as good as you think you are? Dad countered. What if this is the opportunity that changes your life? Besides, David added, you've already proven you can handle big changes. 6 months ago, you didn't know you had a biological family. Now you're managing relationships of 4 parents and a sister you adore. If you can navigate that, you can handle Portland. I pulled out the fellowship letter Professor Lang had given me. Actually, I might have a solution to the being far from everyone problem. I explained about the writing fellowship, about the 6 weeks in Vermont that would overlap with the beginning of Ivy's internship in Portland. So we'd both be having adventures in completely different places, I concluded. We'd both be terrified and excited and probably calling each other every day for moral support. That's perfect, Ivy said immediately. We can be brave together from 3,000 miles apart. Are you sure you want to do it? Mom asked me. The fellowship sounds wonderful, but if you're not ready, I think I am ready, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I think I'm ready to stop playing it safe and start taking risks that might lead to something amazing. Then you should do it, Dad said. Both of you should do it. This family has spent too many years avoiding opportunities because we were afraid of change. It's time to start embracing change as a chance for growth. We spent the rest of the evening making plans and sharing anxieties and celebrating the strange parallel paths our lives were taking. As the night wound down and it came time for everyone to head home, I found myself standing in the driveway with Ivy, looking up at the stars that were just becoming visible above the streetlights. Are you scared? She asked. Terrified, I admitted, but also excited. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm moving towards something instead of just trying to avoid messing up what I already have. That's growth, she said. That's what happens when you stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be brave. What about you? Are you scared about Portland? Absolutely. But I'm also ready. I spent 21 years wondering who I was and where I belonged. Now I know who I am, and I know that where I belong isn't a place. It's the people who love me enough to cheer me on when I'm taking risks. We hugged goodbye, and I watched her drive away with Janet and David, already making plans for when we'd see each other next. Then I went inside to find my parents cleaning up the remnants of our impromptu celebration. Mom, Dad, I said, joining them in the kitchen, I want you to know something. This past year, everything that's happened, it's changed me in ways I'm still figuring out. But one of the biggest changes is that I'm not angry anymore. About the adoption? Mom asked. About any of it? About feeling invisible for so many years. About growing up thinking I wasn't enough. About all the ways we've struggled to connect. I understand now that you were doing the best you could with impossible circumstances, and I'm grateful for the ways your choices led us to where we are now. Dad set down the dish he was drying and looked at me seriously. You know, when you first confronted us about Ivy, I was terrified that we were going to lose you. That you'd be so angry about our secrets that you decide we weren't worth the effort. Instead, you found out that your family was bigger and more complicated and more loving than you'd ever imagined. I said, exactly. And that's because of you, Junie. Because you were brave enough to demand the truth and generous enough to help us all figure out how to live with it. We're proud of the woman you've become, Mom added. But more than that, we're grateful for the daughter you've always been, even when we were too scared and guilty to see you clearly. 3 months later, I was sitting on the porch of a cabin in the Vermont mountains, working on a story about family and truth and the ways love can be both complicated and simple at the same time. My phone rang and Ivy's face appeared on the screen, calling from her apartment in Portland, where she was getting ready for another day at the internship that was exceeding all her expectations. How's the writing going? She asked, and I could see the Portland skyline behind her through her window. Good, I said, showing her the notebook where I'd been working. I'm writing about us, about this whole crazy year. Professor Lang thinks it might be good enough to turn into a book eventually. Of course, it's good enough for a book. It's an incredible story. It's an incredible life, I corrected. The story is just me trying to keep up with reality. We talked for an hour, sharing updates about our respective adventures, comparing notes on being brave in new places, making plans for when we'd both be back in North Carolina. When we hung up, I looked around at the mountains and forests of Vermont, so different from the gentle hills of home, and felt a deep satisfaction with the choices that had brought me here. The compass Cam had given me for my birthday sat on the table beside my notebook, its needle pointing steadily north. But these days, I didn't need it to find my direction. I'd learned that north wasn't a place, it was a decision to keep moving forward, to keep choosing growth over safety, to keep believing that the best parts of life were still waiting to be discovered. 6 months ago, I'd been Juniper Skye, only child, forgotten daughter, someone who felt incomplete without understanding why. Today, I was Juniper Skye, beloved sister, cherished daughter of 4 parents, someone who had learned that being complete didn't mean being perfect, it meant being honest, being brave, and being willing to let love expand your definition of family. I picked up my pen and continued writing, telling the story of a girl who found her sister and, in the process, found herself. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.